welcoming us. Ansley, thank you for getting us started and organizing today. Very grateful. Let's hear it for Ansley. The College Democrats who met with us briefly before we came in told us some of the issues that they are working on right now. We welcome the College Democrats. We welcome the College Republicans. We welcome the College Independents. We welcome the College non-voters. We are grateful to be with you. And to the Black Student Union, the first organization that we met with when we walked through the door. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for your leadership. I know Cleo had to leave, but please send her my regards. Jay, thank you for informing us on some of the history of this institution and the work that you are doing right now. Very helpful for us. My first time at Clemson. And perhaps the last thing that I expected to see at Clemson was the flag of the state of Texas. So thank you for that. Whataburger Company. This is Body by Whataburger. We ate Whataburger for 2 years straight, 5 meals a week. Kept us alive. Thank you all. Very quick, let's do a second visit to South Carolina of this campaign that is today 4 weeks old, 1 month, running for president, running to serve you as the next leader of the United States of America. Running to serve everyone. Like we say in El Paso, no me importa. If you're Republican or Democrat, big city, small town, where you come from, how many generations you can count yourself an American, whether you got here yesterday. As my former colleague and all-time hero John Lewis would say, now we are all in the same boat, and we should treat each other as the Americans and human beings that we are. So let's make sure that we campaign in that spirit, serve in that spirit, treat one another in that spirit. I hail from El Paso, Texas. Yes! I also did not expect to hear that. Do we have any El Pasoans? What high school? Coronado High. I was at El Paso High School. You were my mortal enemy. But now that we're out of El Paso, we can be friends. El Paso is one half of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. The people of Ciudad Juarez and El Paso and southern Doña Ana County in New Mexico come together in the Rio Grande River Valley. 3 million speaking 2 languages, 2 cultures, 2 histories, form one people. And something far more powerful than the sum of the parts or the number of people in that valley, in the Chihuahuan Desert, at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, just extraordinarily beautiful. Not as green as it is here in South Carolina, but gorgeous all the same, just in a different way. And part of what makes it so beautiful is that we have learned not to fear our differences. We respect them and we even embrace them. And it may explain why El Paso, 20 years running, is one of the safest cities in the United States of America. You will not purchase safety or security with a $30 billion, 30-foot high, 2,000-mile-long wall, which will not be built on the U.S.-Mexico border, which is the center line of the Rio Grande River Channel. It will be built, in some cases, miles into the interior of our country. You and I will be forced to take our fellow Americans' ranches and farms and homes and private property to build a solution in search of a problem, because no wall will keep out that child sent by her mother on a 2,000-mile journey, fleeing desperation, violence, and brutality in some of the deadliest places on the face of the earth today. No militarization of our border will stop a parent from scooping up her little child and making that journey on foot, atop a train known as the Beast or La Bestia, not in the seats but on the roof of the train, arriving at their most desperate and vulnerable moment at our front door. the Texas-Mexico border, seeking salvation and refuge and asylum in a country of asylum seekers and immigrants and refugees for as long as we have been a country. And you know full well what we have done to these kids, to their parents so far. Despite the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves in this country's history, and who we know ourselves to be and who we would like ourselves to be going forward. We can lay this at the feet of one man or one political party, but in a democracy where the people are the government and the government is the people, for as long as these conditions persist, it is on all of us. So for those kids who were taken from the arms of their mother by force if necessary, put into cages, the mom deported back to the very country from which she fled in the first place. That child today, perhaps in the custody of Health and Human Services, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, in a foster care home in Indiana or Michigan, or literally God only knows where. The torture and cruelty we are visiting on this child, the scars of which will last for the rest of her life. The fact that months later, some of those parents still do not know where their kids are. It is incumbent upon each one of us. It doesn't matter your party affiliation, who you voted for last time, who you will vote for next time, to do the right thing while we still have time to do the right thing. Never again take another child from another mother or father. Our own asylum laws, our own values, and the best traditions. This visit to South Carolina, we have learned so much about what is possible and so much more about the work left to do. First visit was in Hilton Head. Much the same way I didn't expect to see the Texas flag or a graduate from Coronado High School here today in Clemson. We didn't expect to be in the offices of a bilingual periodical, La Isla, donde encontramos los temas más importantes, incluyendo la reforma migratoria, cambio climático, la necesidad de tener cuidado de salud por todos, and other issues that are important to everyone, regardless of what language you speak, or what country your parents or your ancestors came from. And in that office, I was told this is an example of progress in South Carolina. Communities that were in the shadows, afraid before, standing up, owning who they are, and contributing proudly, openly to the greatness of the United States of America. But at that same table, in a reminder of the work left to do, was a young man who is a dreamer, who cannot afford to attend law school here in South Carolina, so he's going to go to another state that treats him as valuable, knowing the genius and talent inherent with him, that wants the value of that, even if this state does not. And there are more than 1 million like him, brought to this country at a very young age, probably not speaking the language in their home countries, no longer having family there, and knowing full well that if we deport them back to the very countries that they left as a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, and if they're successful against those long odds, they'll be successful in that place, not in this one. It was a reminder that we still have work to do, like freeing every single dreamer from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens. Our next event was a town hall like this one in Bluffton. McCracken Middle School, 750 people showed up, a lot of them public school educators. They may have been there already. We were in a middle school after all, so who knows? One of the things that I've learned is that the pay for public school educators in South Carolina is subpar. The average is $10,000 below the national average. That's just to get the average. And here's the cost to you the taxpayer in South Carolina, to us, the United States of America, who loses out on the potential that we would otherwise realize in those classrooms. 1/4 of first-year public school educators drop out of the profession. In the first 5 years, fully half of them have stopped teaching or participated in public education. Imagine everything that we have invested in their education, K through 12, in financing their higher education debt and grants and scholarships, and now all that investment is gone. Because those teachers and educators are also carrying on their backs $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in student loan debt that they cannot get from under. They're not paid enough to pay that, put food on the table, pay the note on the mortgage or rent in their apartment, and they've got to give up and go do something else. So it's grateful to see all those public school educators who sacrifice so much for those kids in front of them, and it's not just the education that they provide, although that's incredibly important. It's the fact that though they are not paid enough, so many of them out of their own pocket are paying for decorations for the classroom, supplies for those kids who forgot them at home, but also that kid on free and reduced breakfast and lunch who does not have a dinner to look forward to at the end of the day. That teacher is paying for that dinner. That kid who shows up in the same pair of dirty jeans, the same t-shirt, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, by Friday, out of her own pocket, that teacher has purchased a new change of clothes, knowing full well that that child's ability to learn is connected to his sense of self-worth and dignity, and she is going to Let's make sure we invest in that public school teacher, make world-class public school education a priority in the United States of America, starting not in kindergarten, but pre-kindergarten for every child in every community, in every state, continuing to free community college, and ensuring that you go to a public serving 4-year university. That cost is not a barrier or an object, and we help you to do that without taking on a crushing load of debt, which if you are able to assume it, some people cannot, may crush you. Of the $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now, fully 10% of those holding that debt are in default. They just cannot manage anymore. They're sinking under that weight. A lot of work for us still to do. The next day we found ourselves in Charleston. Absolutely beautiful community. Tremendous history there. Some of it not told in public schools in El Paso, Texas. Learn from the very residents who are there as we march to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Medical University of South Carolina nurses strike. 1969, African American women and men are paid a fraction of their white counterparts as they take care of those who are unable to take care of themselves. Ultimately, they cannot hold this anymore and they strike. 12 of those nurses, 11 women, 1 man, are fired. Not only for standing up for themselves, but for standing up for others at that hospital and really across South Carolina. Having the courage of their convictions and joined by thousands others in the streets of Charleston, they are able to gain concessions, better wages, better working conditions, a better grievance process. A story about what is possible in this country when people band together and stand up for themselves and for others. And as we were watching, and one of the organizers, Pastor Dixon, is telling me that right now, and this was hard for me to believe, this came from someone who understands it, conditions are worse for those nurses at MUSC today in 2019 than they were 50 years ago in 1969. He tells me about nurses who are taking care of those who are ill, who need medical care, who themselves cannot afford prescription medication or medical care in the same facility in which they work. We're taking on second and third jobs just to make ends meet. In a country that is the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most technologically and medicinally advanced on the planet, so we're not lacking in resources or means, but we have not yet found the political will to help tens of millions, including those nurses in this country, to pay for the care they need to keep themselves alive, to be able to work only one job so they can take care of themselves, their kids, their families, invest in the future of their community and their country. There is still work for us to do. I'm reminded of a visit to Rock Hill, South Carolina on our last trip, meeting Willie McLeod of the Friendship 9, the courage that he demonstrated by integrating a lunch counter, not just by protesting outside, though he did, but going inside, sitting at that very counter, knowing full well what would happen to him. He would be humiliated in front of his fellow American citizens. He'd be dragged out, taken to jail, where he'd already made a deal with himself. He would not post bail. He stayed in that jail cell for 30 days, as did 8 of his fellow Americans, to shock the conscience of this country and force us to act and to do the right thing. Shows us what is possible when people have courage, stand up against the powers that may be at the time, and bring in others who see their example, are inspired by it, and take action as well. But we know far too well that in this state and in this country, the progress towards full civil rights and integration is far from over. And in some cases, we are going backwards in time right now. So it's up to us to do everything that we can. Make sure that everyone is represented and reflected in our democracy. Take it from a state that until recently, Texas, ranked 50th in the nation in voter turnout, not because we love our democracy any less than you do in South Carolina, but because we were drawn that way by a state legislature that drew people out of a congressional district based on their race and their ethnicity, defying the ideal of one person and one vote, and proving that some votes really are less important than others, and by extension, some people made to feel less important than others, drawn out of a district, drawn out of a reason to vote, drawn out of their very democracy. The same state where you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, you cannot use your student ID at the University of Texas at El Paso to prove who you are at the ballot box. We need a new Voting Rights Act in this country so I want to make sure that in this country we have automatic voter registration. We want same-day voter registration if you missed out earlier. That's the work we have left to do. Going to Denmark, South Carolina, after which we went to Sweden and Norway, which begged the question, was there a Viking invasion at some point in these states past? We were at Voorhees College, one of these world-class HBCUs with extraordinary history, amazing power, getting to see the chapel there built by the very students who attended that institution out of pride and love, not just for their generation, since it was built in 1931, every single generation that followed. And yet we learned in Denmark that they have been cleaning the water with what is tantamount to a pool cleaning chemical for the last 10 years, spoiling the very source of life and health in that community. No longer able to drink the tap water the same way that you could not do it in Flint or in 50 water systems in the state of Texas. It's going to cost between $10 and $15 million to rebuild the water system. The property tax base is not deep enough to fund it. We have not found the political will at the state level to do it. They need federal partnership and leadership to get this done. And though we have a president who talks a lot about infrastructure, we've seen not a single dime in significant infrastructure spend in Denmark, in South Carolina, in the United States of America. Work left to do. And then this morning in Columbia, there's an extraordinary gentleman Todd Rutherford, who is a minority leader in the state house, who insisted that I come with him to visit the African American History Monument on the State House grounds. Erected in 2001, tells in part the story of the slave trade. Those who began the journey in the western countries of Africa. In the Middle Passage, where hundreds, thousands, countless died too sick, thrown overboard. If they made it here in chains, they continued in chains, literally building the wealth of South Carolina, of the United States of America, a wealth that we still enjoy today. And as we were talking about this, and the fight to remove the Confederate battle flag from those same grounds, it was only achieved after the murder, the slaughter of 9 innocent people as they worshiped. He pointed out a statue dedicated to somebody named Benjamin Tillman. Didn't know the name. My excuse is I'm from Texas. But now I know. Somebody who served as your governor, as your United States Senator, has a close connection with Clemson itself. But also was part of a white nationalist terrorist organization that murdered African Americans in this state, that believed that African Americans should be kept in a permanent second class, and did everything within his power as governor, as senator, as a leader in public life to do exactly that. And Representative Rutherford tried to take that statue down. The state legislature was having none of it, so he said this: what if next to that statue we have a plaque that describes his history, our history, my history, exactly what Governor Senator Tillman did to his fellow human beings in his state. That way, when that plaque is up, out of shame, those who erected it will have to pull it down. I thought that was a pretty good idea. The statue, by the way, the Tillman statue on the State House grounds, erected not in 1894, when he finished his term as governor, erected not in 1918, when he finished his last term as senator, but in 1940. Another reminder that the work is never finished unless you stand up and fight for one another. Those who want to keep their purchase on power at the expense of others, including the powerless, will continue to do so. And so as I'm driving to Clemson, I learned about Tillman Hall. And I heard more about it from the Black Student Union, and the experience here as a student of color at Clemson. And I think we really have a challenge, not just as an institution, not just as a state, but as a country, to make sure that if we're going to do the work of repair in this country, that we begin with the truth and the full story, everybody's story. And so, you and others who tried so hard to ensure that Tillman was renamed, maybe to Old Main or something else, we salute you for your efforts, for engaging with those students, for trying to get the conscience of the school and the state. Perhaps, if the Board of Trustees cannot make this decision because they defer to the State House, if the State House is unwilling to pass legislation to do this, perhaps we steal Representative Rutherford's idea and have a plaque that describes in what Tillman has done here and across the state. What it means to us. So I'm grateful to you for the example that you set for us. Listen, whatever we want to be able to do, any of the issues that I raised, universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care for every single person in this country, regardless of your finances or your fortune or your ability, you should be able to see a primary care physician. You should never have to contemplate dying of diabetes in the year 2019 as so many. You should not seek your mental health care for schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or clinical depression in the county jail, which is one of the largest providers of mental health care services in the United States of America today. And if you are a woman, and you understand that this country is in the grips of a maternal mortality crisis 3 times as deadly for women of color, then you understand that universal care means every woman makes her own decisions about her own body. If you want an economy that works for everyone, where not just school teachers and nurses are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, there are people who literally cannot afford to read to their children before the first day of kindergarten or first grade, which may explain why at 5 years old in that kindergarten classroom, there are some kids who are already 10 months back in reading comprehension, 12 months back in math. Not only must we start education at pre-K universally, we must also guarantee that one job is enough for every American. That we have paid families to take care of yourself and your kids and your folks that you need to. That you can afford childcare and that you're paid a living wage. And then lastly, the greatest challenge that we face, the consequences of our decisions disproportionately borne by our children and grandchildren and the generations that will succeed ours in this country and on this planet. The climate change that we are already enduring, that has warmed this planet 1 degree Celsius just since 1980. And when I talk to the mayor of Charleston, he tells me now every single time it rains, it floods in that city. That when you have a hurricane, they are dozens of miles larger across. The storm surge is twice as high and deadly and destructive to property and to human life. He wants infrastructure. He'd love this president to pour some concrete, not on the U.S.-Mexico border, but to keep that storm surge out from this city. He talked to those farmers along the banks of the Missouri River. This year, 2019, saw 4 times the average runoff in the Missouri River Basin, the greatest level of runoff that we have seen for as long as we've been keeping records about the Missouri River, flooding farms and farmers and the stored grain that cannot find markets around the world. As long as we have these trade wars and tariffs, these farmers already underwater financially, now literally underwater, at least their crops, their livestock, and what they produce that feeds us and so much of the rest of the world. In Nebraska, in Iowa, in Missouri, they know that our excesses, our emissions, and our inaction in the face of the facts and the science is at least in part to blame, as do those who live in Houston, Texas. I knew there'd be someone. 58 inches of rain dropped from the sky 2 years ago. That is the landfall record for as long as we've been keeping them in North America. And it was the 3rd 500-year flood in just the last 5 years, which means that the people of Houston had not yet finished rebuilding from the last flood before the next one hit, costing damage in property and lives lost. Those scientists say that storms like Harvey will only become more frequent, more devastating, drop more rain. 58 inches will be a drop in the bucket compared to what we have coming. 400,000 apprehensions on the southern border. Last year, many of them fleeing historic drought in the northern triangle of Central America. Wait until some of those countries can no longer support human life, which is exactly what is going to happen along this current trajectory of warming. But there's one more thing that the scientists say. And that is that we have 10 years left to us, the human race, to get this right, to stop us from warming yet another degree Celsius, after which all bets are off, trains off the tracks. You can never get this planet back again. The places that we live today, in Charleston, in Houston, in New York City, will be literally underwater in a century, if not decades. If we can free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, if we can help farmers plant cover crops, use precision tilling, which you may be studying here, to capture more of that carbon out of the air and disturb less of it that is in the soil, if we can guarantee that more Americans can find work in solar and wind, the two fastest growing industries in this country today for job growth, then we can once again take our rightful position on the world stage, convene the other powers of this planet together to solve an otherwise intractable problem together. As Abraham Lincoln said, we are the last best hope of Earth. And if those words ever rung true, they do now, and it will be not one person, no matter who the next president is, it will not be one political party, because a challenge of this magnitude cannot be met by half measure or by half the country. It will need all of us, regardless of party or race or religion or gender or sexual orientation or immigration status, coming together to serve those generations that will follow us now, so they look back on the people of 2019 with pride, knowing that when we faced our greatest challenge, we were ready for it, and we did it together. In advance of that work that we are all going to do together, and for allowing me to introduce myself to you today, and for the questions that you are going to ask me right now, the suggestions that you are going to offer, the guidance that you will provide. Just know that we are grateful. We look forward to coming back, and I want to work with you, not just to secure the nomination, not just to defeat Donald Trump in November 2020, but to bring this entire country together for everyone, for every single one of us. Thank you, Clemson, for having us. Class of Andrus, some year, El Paso, one of our competitor schools. She's got a microphone. She will bring it to you if you raise your hand. We'll try to get as many people and voices into the conversation. Thanks for joining me.
After talking to you, I know you are from El Paso, and I know how big of an issue immigration is there. And being here at Clemson, we're all taught by grad students, and many of these grad students are from foreign countries. And with them being from foreign countries, they're not sure if they're going to be able to stay here once they graduate, which means they're going to have to go back to their home country, not knowing as many people, not having as good of a job start as they would here by knowing all these people that they've made in the last 4 years, getting their PhD. In which way are you going to make immigration reform so that they can actually stay here and actually have a livelihood and be successful?
Someone suggested, and it's hard to argue with this idea, that as you're walking across that stage to accept your master's or your PhD, and you're here on a student visa from another country, we should staple a green card to that so that you can have permanent residency here in the United States. Whatever your genius is, and whatever way you want to help the world, I want it to happen here in this country. I think we all understand that we, the people of the United States, are the beneficiaries of immigrants at high skills, at lower skills, asylum seekers, refugees. Now, if you measure it, it's a net benefit in the billions of dollars to our economy, but those things that are immeasurable. The fact that this country is not defined as a nation by race or ethnicity, which is the real rare exception on this planet, but instead an ideal that we are all created equal, and the effort and the work and the struggle to realize that, because we're not living that yet today, but we pursue it. At least some of us do, perhaps not the current president, but we do, right? And so part of that is welcoming those from other parts of the world who can find a home here and reveal their genius, not just for themselves, but for all of us. So raise the visa caps that are set artificially low right now. Legalize people in this country, not just dreamers, but the original dreamers and their parents. Millions more laboring in some of the toughest jobs that frankly no one in this country is willing to work, upon which our economy depends, our way of life, the prices that we pay. Bring them out of the shadows, allow them to contribute to their full potential. And when talent wants to come to this country, let's welcome it. Thank you for the question.
Hey, thank you for coming here at the student function. This is an awesome experience to have you here. And as an 18-year-old student, climate change, global warming, and sustainability is a really big and important issue for me, and I think for a lot of other students here. And how can we trust as students that you will prioritize climate change and global warming when you've taken over $500,000 from oil companies, which is the second most out of any congressman or congresswoman?
Yeah, thank you for the question. A couple of clarifying comments. I have not taken a single dime from a single political action committee since the year 2015. So I'm not taking any money from any companies, whether they're oil companies or wind companies or any companies. We did raise $80 million in our Senate race in Texas over the last 2 years. Most of that came from small dollar donors. I think our average donation was $44 over the course of that campaign. And as you can imagine in Texas, many of those donors work for oil and gas companies. They may be out on the rigs, they may be the secretaries, technical letters, answering the phones, they may be some of those executives. So yes, I believe you're correct. We received the second highest amount from employees at oil and gas companies. We may have received the second or greatest amount from employees of hairdressing firms, from wind energy firms, from chocolate chip company firms. You know, whatever it is, so many people, hundreds of thousands contributed to our last campaign that we registered very highly on all of them. You asked about climate change and trust, and you're right to ask these clarifying questions of accountability. My state, Texas, which you know for oil and gas, leads the country. And second place is not even close in the generation of wind power. And we've seen it not only help us in our transition off of fossil fuels, which I agree we must do with as much speed as we can possibly muster, but it also provides jobs. It also deepens the tax base in communities that can now afford to pay their teachers a living wage. In Roscoe, Texas, which used to be known as the home of the cotton gin, just outside of Sweetwater. Roscoe High School, home of the Plow Boys and the Plow Girls, 90% of graduating high school seniors have not just a high school diploma when they walk across that stage, but an associate's degree. So they've gotten a college education at no additional debt to themselves. Some of them graduating with an FAA remote pilot's license to do the remote maintenance inspections on the wind turbines that dot the landscape in Roscoe. In other words, these farmers who were having a heck of a time making a profit, holding on to those farms, passing it on to their daughters and their sons, with the investment in wind turbines and the income that that produces, not only can they stay afloat, but that tax base can now support a world-class investment in public school education. So for every reason, economic, jobs, revival of rural America, transitioning off of fossil fuels, my support is with renewable energy now and going forward. So thank you. Thanks for the
Thank you, first of all, for being here. It's a complete honor to be asking you a question.
Thank you.
I was actually born and raised in Palestine, and I've been living in South Carolina for over 15 years as a citizen. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you for asking the question. The surest way, in my opinion, and those far smarter than I am who I listen to resolve our concerns about the human rights of everyone in the region, the safety and the security of Palestinians and Israelis alike, is a two-state solution. That has been the foreign policy priority stated by the United States of America for some time, until really this administration. It has also been the stated priority of the state of Israel until this Prime Minister, who recently threatened to annex the West Bank, which in my opinion makes peace, not just for the Palestinian people, but for the Israeli people, impossible. I want to make sure that we do everything we can to encourage diplomacy, the leaders of those two people at the same table. Right now it seems that in Mahmoud Abbas, we do not have a leader on behalf of the Palestinian Authority who is able or willing to negotiate in good faith and not incite violence. It seems that in Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, though we congratulate him on his recent election, we don't have a leader who is willing to negotiate in good faith, his alignment with the far-right racist parties in the Knesset, his warning that Arabs are coming to the polls in one of the last elections, and now his willingness to spike any prospect for peace until he accepts a two-state solution. We should do everything within our power with the humility of understanding we can impose no solution upon no people. We've tried that many times to no success whatsoever. That this must be something that the two sides come together on. We should do everything we can to facilitate that, to lead on that, and encourage that. And that will be my policy as your president. Thank you.
Thank you for visiting Clemson. I do enjoy that you speak about civil rights and wage inequalities for people of color and especially for women of color. My question as a disabled American is that there are still laws, particularly the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 that allows disabled Americans employed in government workshops to be paid some minimum wage. What is your opinion on this?
Thank you for the question. And thank you for including this as part of the larger conversation about civil rights and that foundational principle of our country that we are all created equal. We gotta live it. We're not quite there yet. As you probably know, beyond the great victory of the Americans with Disability Act became the great challenge that we saw just within the last couple of years, where the Congress voted to repeal some of those gains that had been made. They wanted to put the onus on you instead of the employer to be able to fix their accommodations so that everyone could enter a given establishment. And advocates such as yourself came to our offices in Congress, ensured that we were aware of what was happening, that we were not only not making progress, and I used to labor under the illusion that that was inexorable, always heading in the same direction. You remind me we've got to fight for it at every turn because it can be, and it was in this instance, rolled back. You also mentioned that there are some in this country, perhaps with the best of intentions when it was implemented, the FLSA, who are working just as hard as anyone else, or being paid a substandard wage. So, whether it is based on your ability, whether it is based on your gender in a country that still does not pay women an equal amount to men working the same job, the same number of hours, whether it is the fact that in some of our states, in my home state, you can be fired for being gay, you can be prevented from adopting a child with 30,000 kids in the foster care system based on your sexual orientation. Civil rights, full rights, should be afforded to every single one of us. Uh-oh. Second mic is out. There we go.
There we go. I know there's a lot of hands up. I'll try to get to as many as I can.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to talk to us earlier. My question is related to public education. I'm a product of the public education system in the state of South Carolina. And I've been seeing a lot of news about various protections for various groups being taken away. Title IX changes, as well as cuts to programs for disabled students in favor of charter school programs. So my question is, what are you going to do if you're like the president to make sure that we provide affordable education to all students, as well as all-encompassing public education?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So back home in El Paso, my three kids, Ulysses, who's 12 years old in the 6th grade, Molly, who's 10 in the 5th grade, Henry, who's 8 years old in the 2nd grade, go to a world-class public school. The younger two, the same public school that I went to, Mesita Elementary. And on Monday, they'll be going to a math class that will be taught in Spanish. On Tuesday, that math class will be taught in English. They're not just listening and learning and speaking and writing in both languages. They're existing in both worlds, making the most of who we are, where we are, and innovation implemented by public school teachers from the community in which they live. In my parents' generation, were you to speak Spanish in those hallways, you would be disciplined. If you kept it up, you would be suspended or expelled. In my generation, there was 45 minutes of Spanish 3 or 4 times a week. My kids' generation, thanks to public school educators, are making the most of who those kids are. Extraordinary potential and promise. So by telling you that story, I'm telling you where Amy and I are placing our bet. And in order for that bet to pay off, for the investment to return a dividend, then we've got to make sure that those teachers are able to stay in the classroom, those counselors and nurses and cafeteria workers and school bus drivers are paid a living wage, that education begins in pre-K and continues beyond the 12th grade, with affordable higher education or a pathway to an apprenticeship and a trade and a skill that you will have with you the rest of your life that will allow you to command a living wage, and to understand that public education is the very bedrock of civics in this country, this e pluribus unum idea, that we're from all over the world, different incomes, different races, different ethnicities, different life experiences, and the one place in this very divided country, at this highly polarized moment, where we come together is in a classroom. And so it explains to me, when I was in a small community, predominantly Republican, listening to a public school teacher, who also happened to be Republican, who told me, Beto, if you let Betsy DeVos take my hard-earned tax dollars out of my public school classroom, away from those kids that I teach every day, turn them into a voucher, send them to a private school, she said, mark my words, I will hunt you down, I will find you, I will hold you accountable for this. She and I, though we come from different political parties in a different part of the state, have found the common ground and the common cause, which will bring us together to fight for public education. Charters have some role as laboratories for innovation, as first envisioned. Public, nonprofit, not private or for-profit, but there is no way that we will be able to charter our way through this challenge and this opportunity. Public schools. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming out here.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming. So actually, this is great to follow from the last question about the classroom. So at the end of your speech, you said that climate change is the most important issue that's facing our nation. But what about the genocide that's facing our nation right now, of millions of kids who are killed every single year and who aren't able to make it to the classroom so they can get a proper education, so they can go out into the world and work and be a part of this community and this great nation. Our nation's amazing, and we're preventing these children from being a part of it, being a part of the world at all. So what do you have to say about the genetically unique children who are inside a woman's body, who are not the woman's body, who are genetically unique, who are their own individual person, who are being deprived of the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness right now?
Thank you for being here and for asking the question. In Texas, we saw more than a quarter of our family planning clinics closed down. For the best of intentions and reasons, the concerns that you just raised. And we are now at the epicenter of that maternal mortality crisis, as we made it so hard for women to get a cervical cancer screening, to get family planning help, to see a provider of any kind in a state like yours that failed to expand Medicaid at a time that the federal government was willing to pay 100 cents on the dollar. Texas is also now the leader in the country in the rate of repeat teen pregnancy. And so for those women whose lives have been lost, 3 times worse, as I mentioned earlier, for women of color, for those women's health that we care about now and going forward, I want to make sure that we follow the law of the land, which has been the case since 1973, and the Roe versus Wade decision, that every woman should be able to make her own decisions about how. That's the question, and I understand that we come to different conclusions on this issue, but I respect yours, and I thank you for asking. Thank you.
And I'm really sorry, I know there's a lot of hands up, I only have time for 3 more. Hi, first off, I'd just like to say thank you for coming to visit Clemson. It's really great to have you here and hear your views on everything. Also, I can't talk to you and not say this. You had dinner with my sister last night. She said you tried a pimento cheeseburger and she wanted to see if you liked it.
That was awesome.
I have a more general question. Just with everything, like the climate of our nation, everything that's happened, like from the 2016 election going forward, what do you think is the biggest thing at stake coming up with the 2020 election?
Great question. So I've tried to refrain from saying this because I really do believe in this, and this is what gets me motivated and excited, and the reason that I'm here with you today and not at Ulysses baseball game with Amy right now. We have these extraordinary challenges, and we, the United States of America, is uniquely the indispensable country that can meet them, not just for ourselves, not just for the next generation, but really for the world. It's the challenge of all challenges right now, and I want to focus on our aspirations, our ambitions, bringing us together in order to meet those challenges. But you ask about the threats that we face, the challenges that we must overcome to get to those bigger issues: healthcare, immigration, climate change. We have a president of the United States who only a couple of days ago tweeted out a video of a member of Congress, duly elected by her constituents in Minnesota, who happens to be a Muslim member of Congress, conflated her words in a speech with the terrorist attack of 9/11 and ends with a statement, "We will never forget." Not only does that bring threats against the life of Representative Omar and other Muslim Americans in a country that has seen a rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years. Not only does it compound the problems of a presidential candidate, now our commander-in-chief, who sought to ban all travel from one religious group to this country. And you're hard-pressed to find another example of a leader of a Western democracy seeking to outlaw or ban or keep from their country all people of one religion. On the very day they signed the executive order that attempted to ban Muslim travel in February of 2017, the mosque in Victoria, Texas was torched and burned to the ground. When I went to LBJ Elementary, visiting the 3rd grade classroom, Mexican-American girl asked, "Why does the president not like me?" Because as a candidate, he talked about Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, now describes asylum seekers as animals and an infestation. And that second word, again, would not expect to hear it in this republic. Maybe somewhere else in a Reich far, far away, in another year, in another decade, in another century. The case that I'm making is the rhetoric that he employs, the language that he uses, does not just offend our ears or our sensibilities. There's a real cost and consequence in human life. And this experiment, this idea 243 years in, that is not guaranteed another 243 or even another year or 2 years going forward, unless we do everything within our power right now to save it. The kids in cages, the moms sent back, in some cases to certain death, from the most violent countries on the planet, that follows from a president who's described his fellow human beings in this way. As George Will, a conservative commentator, no shrinking liberal himself, has said, you may or may not wonder whether the president or his campaign attempted to collude with a foreign power. But on that stage in Helsinki, Finland, as he was next to Vladimir Putin, who was responsible for seeking to undermine our democracy in 2016, and someone argued that he did, when he said, I believe that guy, not my own intelligence community, not my own country, George Will says that's collusion in action. This president has shown he will say anything, do anything, even at the expense of our common decency and dignity, the lives of our fellow Americans, and the viability and the sanctity of this democracy. That is what we're up against. And if all of us do not come together at this defining moment of truth for this country, I guarantee you we will lose it. And that's the reason I'm here. It's the reason that you are here right now. It's why I have hope. It's why I'm optimistic. And and that's why we absolutely must win this election.
My name is Beto O'Rourke. I wanted to thank you for coming to our state, South Carolina. You've talked a lot about underserved and underrepresented communities, and I wanted to ask for your opinion on prison reform, specifically private prisons, and the offensive and cruelty so many of our American citizens and non-citizens face.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. One of these things is hard for us to accept about ourselves because it defies the story that we tell about ourselves. Our bravery, our freedom, the way we cherish our liberties, is that we imprison more of our own people per capita than does any other country in the world. So many there for non-violent drug crimes, including possession of marijuana, to which you cannot become addicted, from which you will not die, unless you overdose on Cheetos or... and which can be so helpful to those who have no other recourse to any other medication or help for them. I was talking to Representative Rutherford about this. He's sponsoring a medical cannabis bill. Got a chance to meet his mother, who suffers from fibromyalgia. There's nothing in the world for those who suffer from this that makes life bearable except medicinal cannabis. And yet she'll be a criminal in the eyes of the law here in South Carolina if she does the one thing that she can for herself. At a town hall meeting like this, a veteran in El Paso, Texas stood up and said, I was prescribed opioids by the VA, to which I became addicted. The VA cut off my prescription with no other alternative prescription or medication or therapy, and he admitted in front of all of us that he's buying heroin off the street. 70,000 overdose deaths just last year in this country. Purdue Pharma, which marketed these opioids to doctors and prescribers, said it was a miracle pain-killing drug with no side effects, no danger of addiction, though it looks like they knew otherwise. No executive, no shareholder has paid any meaningful price or spent a night in jail. And yet we are locking up people, disproportionately people of color, for possession of marijuana that is legal or decriminalized or medicinalized in the majority of the states of this union. People who, upon release, every time they want to apply for a job, will check a box that says that they have a conviction, meaning that they will not get the job. Who will not be able to come to Clemson because that conviction and their time in prison prevents them from qualifying for a federally backed student loan, whose future is constrained, whose options are narrowed, whose life will forever after be different. And not only does that person lose out, we lose out on their potential and the opportunity that they otherwise would have provided. To address this, we must not only end the federal prohibition on marijuana once and for all, we must also expunge the arrest records of everyone arrested for possession. We must end private for-profit prisons in this country. A system of cash bail where you use too poor to get out of jail. And the war on drugs has become a war on people that some have described as the new Jim Crow, given how disproportionately it is enforced and how effective it has been in suppressing some communities in this country. But we cannot have this conversation without having the larger conversation about the legacy of slavery, and segregation, and Jim Crow, and suppression in this country. People who were criminalized based on the color of their skin, pressed into convict gangs that built Tillman Hall in the first place, because they were African American in the first place. There's a consequence of that can be measured in the wealth of white America that is 10 times the wealth of black America, the disproportionate number of people who are in these prison cells today, and the inability for far too many of our fellow Americans to find a path forward, whether it's in education or in healthcare or in our economy. If we are going to begin the work of repair, as we began with our conversation with Jay at the outset of this meeting, And we must have the truth and tell the full, honest story of this country. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for coming. I wanted to ask you, as a veteran who's done 12 years and been stationed in Fort Bliss, Texas, what can we do with the broken system of the Department of Veterans Affairs when it comes to disability claims and helping out veterans that are homeless?
First of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to our country. And as I've seen from so many military retirees and veterans, it's service that continues long after you're out of uniform. Because here you are standing up not for yourself, but for other veterans and future veterans who will be coming back from these wars that we have been fighting, in some cases 18 years and counting in Afghanistan, really 28 years and counting in Iraq. I was 18 years old, a senior in high school, when George H.W. Bush first announced the use of military force in that country. Through 6 successive presidential administrations, we remain there tonight with no definition of victory, no commonly understood strategy, and yet brave women and men putting their lives on the line for this country nonetheless. But we're also in Somalia, and Yemen, and Libya, and Syria, all through an authorization passed in 2001. It has not been seriously debated or discussed in Congress since then. And though we've spent trillions going to war, sending those women and men overseas with the bullets and the bombs, we have failed to pay the cost of their care when they return. In this country today, 20 veterans take their lives every day by their own hands. 16 of 20 unable or unwilling to go to a VA and get the care that might otherwise save their lives, because in some instances the wait time to see a provider is not measured in hours or days or weeks, but months, years. Sometimes it never comes. El Paso, Texas, my hometown, when I was elected, the worst performing VA for mental health care wait times in the country. Care delayed became care deferred, became care denied, and those veterans far too often were taking their lives. Compounded by the fact that some could not find a home despite their service, or access their post 9/11 GI Bill because of an other than honorable discharge. Perhaps they were pushed into because they were no longer of service to the Army or the Navy or the Marines. So, if we are going to live our morals and our values, we're going to get right with our conscience. We're going to make sure that we pay any price, bear any burden for those who have stood up and put their lives on the line for this country. It will not come cheap. There are thousands of homeless veterans across this country who are unable to access those HUD VASH vouchers. An improvement under the Obama administration, but we need to do far more under the next administration. We need to invest in mental health care like we did in El Paso. We made it a priority. We went from 68 full-time providers and mental health care staff to today just under 120. We're no longer dead last in the country. People no longer waiting years to get help. We've opened up more appointments, more opportunities, and saved more lives. So this investment must be made, but I would argue that in addition, además, y finalmente, we've got to ask ourselves how we create these veterans in the first place. War without end, all over the world, without any understanding of the consequences or costs or the price paid by you and others who have fought these wars, cannot be sustained, whether we measure the cost in human lives or in trillions of dollars that are spent. Let's end these wars, bring these service members back home to their country, and have a foreign policy that prioritizes diplomacy and peaceful means to achieve our goals. Thank you very much. Thank you. Clemson.